Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another edition of our webinar series, Inside Immigration. Today, we're joined by Managing Partner Evan Green and Senior Associate Shannon Kampf. Please feel free to ask any questions via the pop-up text bar on the right side of your screen. We'll do our best to address your questions at the end of the webinar. If the panelists do not get to your question, you can contact them through the information provided on screen now. And with that being said, I'm going to hand things over to the panelists.
Good afternoon, everyone, and hope everybody is keeping warm on this lovely, lovely day. So our goal today is to bring you up to speed with some of the changes that are occurring and have occurred. And Shannon and I will take you through that. Stephen, do you want to put up the slide of the various issues that we're going to be discussing today?
That is a great suggestion, Evan. Bear with me 2 seconds while I do that.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, so these are the various issues we're going to talk about today and to bring you up to speed. So I guess what we'll start with is travel requirements and what's going on with travel. So Shannon, over to you. I'm coming to Canada. What do I need to do?
Well, hopefully I've got it right, because we've been having changes back and forth over the past 2 years. It's a little tricky sometimes to keep up to date, and I don't blame people that are struggling with it. But essentially, the requirements haven't changed that much. Well, sort of. We still have the pre-departure requirement of a COVID test, generally speaking, so that's needed. And then the big change that happened in December really was the re-implementation, I should say, of the arrival test. And this is kind of where we get into a lot of confusion and unknowns, because at the moment, and correct me if I'm wrong, Evan, it's still random.
Well, it's okay. So there's two sets of rules we have right now. Okay, right. So first one, as you've said, Shannon, you have to take a PCR test within 72 hours of your intended arrival, okay? And obviously negative. And if you used to be able to, if you were going to the US and coming back, use that same Canadian test to come back. That is no longer the case. They changed that rule. So if you're going to Buffalo to go shopping, you got to take a PCR test in Buffalo to come back, okay? So that's one. So in terms of the landing testing, if you're just coming back from the US, it is, as you said, random and selective. But if you're coming back from everywhere else, it's not supposed to be random. Everybody's supposed to be, but as you've said, we are seeing that it's random. It's random.
Yeah.
I think the other thing to
selected, that's for sure.
Right. And the other thing, you know, we've seen is people when they land, there's a huge line sometimes. Over Christmas, there was these great lines, and they were handing out test kits to people and letting people go with the test kits, and other people, they said no. And anyway, it was a little bit of a mess at the airports. It seems to be getting a little bit better with that. But the interesting thing is, if you're coming back from anywhere but the US, you're actually supposed to quarantine until you get that test result, okay? So have you heard of any people actually being checked on for this? Because I haven't. Actually.
No, I mean, I've still had people coming in and not being selected for testing. I'm still seeing some of that. And then checked on? No, no one's reported back to me.
No, in the olden days, you used to expect a knock on the door occasionally. We haven't seen that. Robocalls, yes, lots of robocalls. But you know, the problem, of course, has been with testing. People, you know, initially with this idea that you get your test result back in 24 hours, okay?
Right.
That's not what's being seen, you know? It's not coming back in 24, it's not coming back in 48. And sometimes it's, you know, 5-6 days. And you're actually supposed to stay in quarantine during that time until you get that test result for anywhere but the US, okay?
Yeah, it's if you've been anywhere but outside of Canada or the US in the 14 days prior to your travel.
That's
so really, even potentially coming back from the US, if you transited through the US, you may need to quarantine as well.
Correct. That they
And
asked that on the Arrive Can app. They specifically
yeah,
asked that question. So that's true. Yeah.
and it's just so hard to know for businesses, I think. Like especially if you're coming for business travel, you've got to go to meetings. You don't know what's going to happen and how long you might have to quarantine, because it's until the results come in. So
right.
It's very hard.
We asked the question, what happens if I go to one of those private clinics and pay for a negative PCR test? Can I use that PCR negative test on arrival to get out of quarantine? And the answer we got from public health was, that's a very good question. We didn't get an answer. They go, okay, we'll look into that and get back to you, but we don't know the answer to that. So yeah, like everything, a lot of stuff up in the air here. A lot of stuff up in the air. What about, here's the big question, and this just changed on January 15th. Right. What happens if I'm positive when I'm away? When do I get to come back?
Yeah, we're getting this question more and more. We're definitely, back a year ago, it wasn't really an issue. People weren't really asking me this, but I'm definitely getting asked it a lot more. I'm positive. I'm sick right now. I was sick and now I'm better, but I'm still testing positive. What do I do? So now, if you have a positive test that was taken between 11 and 180 days prior to your travel, you can travel with that positive test. The idea being that a lot of people continue to test positive even when they're recovered, etc. So otherwise they wouldn't ever, be able to travel they wouldn't get that negative test. So
yeah,
this is
it's a get out of jail free card, basically. But it's interesting because the wording, right? So you have to have a positive test and it's more than 10 days. So it's 11 days, not 10 days. Okay. Yeah. So you've got to watch that. So that just changed on the 15th, and then you don't have to test again. Now, remember though, you can't use one of the home tests and say, here's my test. Okay. It has to be an official test, I would say. Yeah. Right? That you got it's a real one, not one of the home ones. They won't accept that.
And some clients are telling me they want to try to get a negative test before traveling, just because they feel more comfortable traveling with that. So I think that could be done, but then you just got to be careful which one you upload and provide as proof of your test. If you don't end up getting a negative test, you've got to use that older test to travel.
Yeah, no. And in terms of the US, the rule is to enter the US, if you were positive, 10 days, because this the same issue, you may still test positive, 10 days, and a letter from the doctor saying that you've recovered, and then you're good for a 3-month period to the US, okay? And you don't have to show the negative antigen test within 24 hours of travel. So that's what's going on there. But, currently, what's the date today? As of today, Wednesday, January 26th at 12:10 p.m., these are the rules.
Yeah.
It's changing all the time. There's a lot of pressure to get rid of the testing requirements. A lot of countries are getting rid of them. And this is Canada, US. If you're going somewhere else, check out those rules. But really, the thing to remember is if you are traveling and there's still that travel suggestion by the government that they don't want people traveling. But if you are traveling, you got to prepare that you could get stuck out for 10 days, okay, or 11 days, as we're saying. And if you attempt to come back in prior, as a Canadian citizen, you are allowed to come in, but what will they do, Shannon?
Well, you would end up in quarantine, a full quarantine.
Quarantine and fined.
Yeah.
Right? If you show up with a positive test within that period of time. So lots to think about.
The other big change that we saw recently was effective January 15th, which has been a key date, is that it's now almost impossible to come here if you're unvaccinated.
Yeah.
There used to be some exceptions to it. Some people could come as unvaccinated travelers, and it's really closed down, and there are very few exceptions left now. So it's very tough.
Yeah, same to the US, except for US citizens and permanent residents. You can't get into the US now if you're not vaccinated. And the definition of vaccination doesn't really encompass the booster yet. It's just that you've had both first and second shots. So check before you travel, okay? And reach out.
All the time.
Yep. So let's talk about delays and challenges that we're currently seeing.
Well, I mean, you know, throughout the pandemic, we've seen fluctuations in timelines and processing times, and things have improved and then gotten worse. And I think we're still in that scenario. There are some very, very significant delays happening right now. We know there are a lot of, you know, the government has a huge backlog of files of all different types. And so there's certainly some challenges. For example, one that I deal with, and I know you deal with a lot, Evan, are dependent family members of temporary foreign workers in India in particular.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, anybody who's filed separately from the worker, from the principal applicant, it's sitting. You know, we've tried all sorts of things, and it's just not moving, and it's really impacting people. It's impacting families. They're separated. You know, it's very personal to people who are here as temporary foreign workers that their family can't get processed. So it's very frustrating. But
sure.
the delays are extensive on that.
Yeah, for sure. And it sort of plays into our third point, which is express entry and rounds of invitations, because there was a memo released a week ago, 10 days ago, that the press picked up on the weekend to talk about backlogs within the system. So it's sort of, I mean, everybody's aware of the fact that over the pandemic, federal skilled workers were not being selected. You had to have at least a year of Canadian work experience, and as such, you'd be accepted within the candidate experience class of applicants. It's a huge, there was special programs last year, and as a result, I think since September, we haven't seen even a draw since the end of September at all, where it was pretty much every 2, maybe 3 weeks for a draw. We haven't seen any since then. So the guidance the government gave, which really wasn't much guidance, is there's a temporary pause on CECs, the Canada Experience class, till at least the end of this month. And then they're going to look at it, but it may even be held to the end of the year. Sorry, excuse me, to later in the year for 6 months. So Shannon, what are your thoughts there?
Well, it makes it really difficult for people to plan. You know, it puts certain people in a very difficult situation, people who are expecting permanent residence, who up until September, you know, it was pretty clear it shouldn't be an issue. They were doing fine. And now we're only seeing people under the provincial programs get selected. And prior to that, we would have always told people to go with express entry and not do the provincial if you didn't have to. But now we're kind of reversing, and the provincial programs aren't always that great either. So it really puts people in a bind. And I think the people that it's going to affect the most are really students, international students who have graduated, got some work experience in Canada. You know, their work permits are expiring. They probably don't have a lot of options to extend their work permit. They were counting on PR. I mean, a pause for a brief period of time is maybe one thing, but it's getting pretty extensive now. And so, you know, they couldn't have predicted that, the students and people in that kind of a situation. If you can't extend your work permit, I think you're going to be.
No, I mean, I mean, people are gonna have to file LMIAs for those students, because under the current system, once they've reached the maximum under the postgraduate work permit, that's the only way to extend.
Yeah, in most cases.
The one thing I would say here in terms of advice is, because we aren't seeing as many express entry draws, that there's going to be more extensions that are being filed that we can expect. Number 3 going into number 2, so there'll be delays in extensions. So our advice would be file those extensions early. You can file them 6 months before the expiration date, and that's what we would recommend to people to do.
They're already getting quite delayed on the extensions as well. Right now, we're seeing about 4 or 5 months processing time for inland extensions, which is very long.
Very long.
Very long.
Very long. Yeah, for sure. So delay. So 2022 sounding an awful lot like 2021. Let's talk about something good, which is the reopening of the IEC. So Shannon, tell us about that.
Sure. So the IEC is International Experience Canada program. It is a work permit program geared towards young people. It is set up based on agreements the Canadian government has with certain governments. So it is only for certain individuals, certain nationalities, let's say. There are certain countries that have these agreements in place, and therefore young people, depending on the agreement, either usually up to 30 years of age or up to 35 years of age, can participate in these programs. There are a few different subsets under it, different programs, working holiday, young professionals, but it was a little up in the air for a while with through the pandemic. It did reopen last year, but had some conditions. It opened late, etc. So normally what happens is it opens kind of at the start of the year. There's a set number of places available for people, and as they get used up, that starts to disappear, and then usually they fully shut it down in the fall sometimes. So this year they did open it on a more normal time frame. They did open it, I believe it was a week or 2 ago. So that's a good sign. They have started doing draws. So this is a program where you put in a profile and you wait for an invitation from the government. So it's a little bit different than other types of work permits. But they are drawing people. They are inviting people to apply. It may depend a little bit on the country. So definitely always check the particulars of the country, whether they've started doing the draws or not. But I've certainly seen draws from Germany, Belgium. So there are a number of draws happening. So it's good news. Young people can come and get some work experience, and employers can benefit from that.
But you must be vaccinated, because if you're not vaccinated,
you can't get on the plane. So
you can't get on the plane. No, we won't get into a Djokovic situation. We'll just not let them come. So that's something to be aware of. Yeah, the IEC is open. Initially, during the pandemic, some of them were like you had to have a job or they wouldn't even consider you. It's more open this year, seems to be, but based on vaccinations. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the thing that we're seeing is delay. We're seeing uncertainty, and we're seeing switching priorities, and it's just a matter of planning, okay? And really planning what's plan B. Whenever I look at a case, I'm like, okay, here's plan A, but in the back of my head, I've always got plan B in case we don't have plan A. And now, especially with students, like you were saying, you got to have a plan B, okay? And if you do have to go to the LMIAs, we're seeing those approved quite well in Ontario, but if there's going to be a lot more, there could be delay there. Out west, we're already seeing delay, okay? It's already
Quebec has significant delays as well.
Right.
Significant. For regular LMIAs, it's very delayed.
Right. So, well, how are we doing, Stephen? Because I think
we're doing good.
Shannon and I are ready to...
Yeah, ready to go. Looks like there's not many questions have come in, so we can wrap it up for today.
Sure. Okay.
I would like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. And a special thanks to you, Evan and Shannon, for sharing your expert knowledge today. We really, really appreciate it. For anyone in the audience, if you would like to discuss today's topics in more detail, please reach out and book a consultation. You can find the details on screen now. And I would also encourage everyone to sign up to our alerts and follow us on social media to keep up to date with the latest developments inside Canadian immigration. And until next time, everybody, stay safe.
Stay safe. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shannon.